Okay, let's take a look at why and how automation numbers for your flows really can add so much functionality and organization and bring you so much joy as an admin or a developer or architect that I think everyone should be using automation numbers. Now, the most obvious reason is just the naming convention of being able to tell which flow you're actually talking about, because you can have very similar names that you're calling as a screen flow or a record trigger flow or a scheduled flow, and you might be doing a similar function but you're calling it from a different object and you're passing in different variables, and you can easily get confused as to which flow is which flow. But if you have a rock solid naming convention, including an automation number, then when there's no doubt, when you see where is this used, or you're doing a debug, as to which flow you're talking about, you're looking for, and you are 100% sure every time. So that is the simplest reason for it. But that's just a tip of the iceberg, because what else can we do? Well, one of the things is that you would edit access to flows, and best practice would be to do something like this. You don't usually want to allow every user that has the checkbox, for flow permissions to be able to access every single screen flow in your org. So you would click this override, and you can do it by profiles as here. But best practice, actually, and the way Salesforce is really going, is here to use permission sets. So by using a automation number for my permission set, I just added so much more clarity to the situation. So I have flow 102, and here is a permission set for flow 102. And what flow am I getting permission for? Well, you guessed it, flow 102. How clear is that to be able to be sure that your permission sets of which flows you're giving your users access to? And then another step forward in that is that once you have many permission sets for your users, which I expect you will be having, is that you now can see right away, because of my naming convention, I know that's flow 102. I also have a great naming convention, so I know what that flow is doing for my user. But because it has a number, and some of my other permission sets that are not automation won't have numbers, I can just glance at, even if I had 100 permission sets for this user, and know which what I'm giving that user access to. In addition to that, when you have many of these permission sets, it's just, you can sort them. It's just so much easier. So, okay, you say, well, all right, organization and giving user access, not too exciting. Not too exciting so far. But here's another reason why the numbering system and a really good naming convention, which is tied to having an automation number, is that when you are calling from a Lightning page, you also have the additional benefit of knowing that you're calling the correct flow. And with the naming convention here, I've taken it a step further, and with and in the way that I name mine, I know that that's a subflow. So I would not want to be calling a subflow from my Lightning app builder. So, okay. So now we have a few things that we've done with our automation number. We're just getting started. So here is another thing that you can do. Record triggered flows are going to run all the time for every user except for your criteria. But what if we want to just turn off, let's say we have 25, 30 record trigger flows running, and there's just one record trigger flow I want to turn off. I don't want to always do activate and deactivate. this is called a bypass, and this is something that is best practice, and Salesforce recommends you do it, although they don't tell you how to do it. So what you can do here is you can use your automation number here and turn off just one flow at a time using custom settings. We'll talk about this more. I have recorded a session on YouTube channel which explains in depth on how to create these switches, or I would say Salesforce calls them bypasses, I call them switches. And the brilliant thing about using your custom settings is that you're not using a query, you're not using a get records at all, so you're not using up any of your limits to do this. And in addition to that, it allows you to turn off by object or globally turn off all your record trigger flows at a time. And you say, well, I don't have a use for that. You may in the future. You never say never. You're doing some kind of operation and one flow is getting in your way. You can simply just change the setting and turn it off temporarily. And that would be done using custom settings, which again, I'll go into more detail in another video, but I would just, that flow is named 727, and I would just add that to my flow switch, and now that flow will not run. And when I want it to run again, I'm just gonna take that off of my settings, and that flow will run again. I don't have to go back into that flow and activate or deactivate. So I don't know if I've won you over yet, but this one may. So another thing about having these automation numbers is that you can use these numbers to trigger your automation. Okay, so on account, I've created a field called trigger. And sometimes what I've realized over my journey with flows is that you create some wonderful automation, and now you have records that weren't affected by this automation. You want to go back and clean up all those records or check everything and make sure it's caught up to what you're trying to do with the current records. And record triggered flows only run when they're triggered. So you may want to, as an admin, run a certain flow or create certain flows just for this purpose. For data cleanup, I can imagine how many uses an admin would have for creating flows that only run for themselves. And the way you can do that is have a field that you only have access to, that no one else has access to this field. And that number, that automation number field, is how you are going to trigger that flow. So you have your own secret running record triggered flows, because normally you can restrict usage with flows to certain users, and that's a whole nother session. You would use custom settings. I think is the best way to do that, to block some users from triggering your flows, or you could do it in your criteria, which I don't recommend because it's kind of like hard coding, certain users, certain things, where there's other ways to do it that are a lot more elegant. But this trigger, this field is 4 characters long as text. That's all you need. So that is the automation number. That's just the tip of the iceberg. When you do debug logs, there are so many things. I'm sure you're going to think of I don't even know how many more exciting uses for automation numbers, but I'm not as blank Monica. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you again soon.